This tutorial will show you how to set up our SAML app together with our user sync functionality to synchronize your users from Azure into your Atlassian application and authenticate them as well. We'll first start off with the user sync functionality so that we can actually synchronize users into your Atlassian application. And then in the second part of this video, we'll configure the SAML side to do the single sign-on and authentication of the users that we first synchronized. So in order to start off with the user sync functionality, we need to go into Azure AD, set up or create an app registration, which essentially creates a endpoint for the Graph API that we can use. And then we jump over to our app in the user sync tab so that we can create a connector there that does all the synchronization. I will also do a little bit of a talk through of some of the most important functions that you have an idea what it can do and which ones you might need. And afterwards we'll do the SAML side, so we'll do the side that does the authentication for the users that we just synchronized in. And to do that, we'll start off in our SAML wizard, then go over to Azure to create an enterprise app so that we also have an endpoint for the SAML authentication. And then we'll move back over to our app and finish off the wizard. And we're certainly going to test the whole combination that the full login works for the users that we synchronized. We're now on portalazure.com. So we go to app registrations, which essentially gives us an entry point, an API endpoint to use the Graph API. Select new registration here, give it a name. I'll always take the instance name so that I can find it again. We want to do this for accounts in our directory. Let's say register, and that creates this app registration. Now the next thing we need to do is look at the permissions that this app registration gets. So what can we actually access within Azure via this app? So let's go to API permissions. We've got user read already. Now we need to add one. Microsoft Graph, application permissions. I'm going to type directory here. And here you find the directory read all. Say add permission. And the next thing is we need to grant admin consent so that an admin has accepted that we can use this. So grant admin consent and say yes. So now you see this is done. So from now on we could use this. The next thing we need is essentially a password, so a secret to access this. Let's go to certificates and secrets. New client secret. Well, that also needs a description, and it also wants to know what the expiry date for that secret is. So that's really your choice what you select here. However, once that expires, it means you need to create a new one, and you also need to swap it out on user sync. I'm going to do 24 months. You could also do custom and take it into 2099, which essentially creates a secret that never expires, if that's what you like to do. So I created it. Now I've got the value here. So I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. This is the only time I'm going to see it. So save that because you'll need it in our app in a minute as well. But that's essentially everything we have to do on the Azure side to create this API endpoint. So now let's swap over to Jira and configure our user sync functionality there. So you see I'm already in user management, and you can see at the moment I only have an admin user, nothing else. So once you installed our app, you have the tab user sync on the left. So let's go there. And now we can create what we call a connector. So you see we implemented the API of a lot of the common identity providers, including Azure AD. So if we now want to create a connector that synchronizes to Azure AD, we go here to Azure, and you can actually create multiple. You could have 2 or 3 connectors synchronizing users from different Azure tenants, for example. So, but for this tutorial, we'll just create one. So let's go to Azure here. And now you see you are in the configuration screen here. So let's call that Azure AD. And you see it wants to have application ID, the tenant ID, and the application secret. I still have the secret copied, so I paste that here. And now to look up the application ID and the tenant ID, I need to go back to Azure to copy it from there. So back to Azure, go to overview of the app, and here's my application ID. I'm going to copy that, paste it here, and going back here, the directory ID is just below that. Let's copy that to the clipboard and go here. So, and that would essentially be everything that we need to configure to be able to synchronize with Azure AD. But nevertheless, I still want to talk you through a couple more settings over here, which might be interesting to you. So the first one is required groups. If you don't want to synchronize all users from Azure into your Atlassian application, then you can specify groups here. That will be groups that exist on Azure, and only users in these Azure groups will actually get synchronized into the Atlassian application. So if you have something like a Jira users group on Azure, you could put that in here in required groups, Jira users, and then only users from that group would be synchronized. No? Quickly going to go to provisioning settings here. With the attribute mapping down here, you could map more fields from the Azure API into fields in Jira, or on Confluence, for example, you have a lot more user profile fields to write them in here. But also here's a section about group management. The default setting for our user sync is that it takes Azure AD as the single source of truth. So the group memberships will get synchronized, and all group memberships will get synchronized. And if a user gets removed from a group in Azure, he'll get removed from that same group in the Jira application or the Atlassian application. If that's not what you want, if you want, for example, to only use local groups or mix between local and Azure groups, that's what you have to configure in group management here. Or if you want to filter groups so that you only assign some selected groups from Azure to that user, that's what you configure here in group management. Read the documentation about it, and if you have any questions, that sometimes is the most complicated part of the configuration. If you have any questions, especially also if you migrate existing users into this, then really reach out to our support or schedule a screen share session with us. We're really happy to help you with that and get it working very well. And as always, try this in a dev instance before you do that on your production system. Last but not least, let's go to the sync settings. And here you can turn on scheduled synchronization. The default is that the synchronization will run once an hour. You can modify that with a cron expression here. If you have a small Azure instance, so like 500,000, 2,000 users, then once an hour is absolutely fair to do. If you have your 150,000 users in there, then the syncs take some time, so you want to schedule that down a little bit. And again, if you need advice here, then contact us. We're happy to help. So that's all that we need to do. Let's say save and return. And now you see we have a connector here. It's never synced, so let's kick off a sync now. See, the status is running, result is pending, because the sync is going on. Let's wait for that, and you see it's starting to add users into my instance. We'll probably speed that up later a little bit. 1 cup of coffee later, you see we're done. It's been a success. Took 4 minutes 21 seconds to create nearly 12,000 users. So that sync was a success, and this would happen once an hour from now on with the based on the schedule. So let's close this. You see done with success. And here in the history tab, you'll see all the previous things and details. So if something failed, you can have a look there and see the same detail section that we did before. Let's just quickly look what this has done. So let's go to user management. And now you see I nearly have 12,000 users in this instance, so it created a lot of the users here and their group memberships as well. Behind the scenes, I'm just going to quickly go to user directories. It actually created an additional directory called Azure AD of the type internal. So every connector gets this internal directory that behaves like a normal Jira directory, where it synchronizes users into. So this also respects the directory order. If you know what it is, then it just behaves like a normal Jira directory is what I'm trying to say. So that's it. That's all that's needed to synchronize your users and groups from Azure AD into the Atlassian application. So the last thing we need to do is to move over to the SAML part of our plugin and finish the configuration so that we can actually authenticate via SAML against Azure AD. Let's move over to SAML Single Sign-On. And once we get there for the first time, you'll actually see our Getting Started wizard. And what we want to do is add a new identity provider. We select Azure AD here. And then go to Next. Now the plugin shows us all the important URLs or values that we have to enter into the enterprise app in Azure AD. By default, that's all the same. So if you haven't changed any of our defaults, you just need to cut and paste one of them. Let me just copy one. And then let's move over to Azure. Right, so here's still our app registration. Now we need to go to Enterprise Apps. So let's go to Home, Enterprise Applications. New application. Now we need to search for ours in the catalog resolution. Let's select the one for Jira for our tutorial here. And let's give it a good name. Yeah. And let's say create. This is now creating the enterprise application. Choose a good name because that's the name that your users will be seeing in their dashboards, that they have access to that application. And also it's sensible to use our pre-configured catalog app that already sets some settings that we need. But it also is, with the catalog app, you can actually use the free version of Azure. So if your Azure comes with Office 365, for example, then you can use this with a catalog app. If you would create a custom SAML app, that would only work with the premium licenses from Azure. Right, now you see it redirected us to the overview of that app. And let's go to properties now. First thing we do is turn off user assignment required. What that actually means is every user in your Azure instance will see this app integration as a possibility to authenticate. So if they go to that dashboard, that Jira app will appear. If that's not what you want, then you can still control it and can leave it turned on, the user assignment, and then go to users and groups and assign individual users or individual groups to that application, and only those groups will see the icon popping up and have the rights to do an authentication via SAML. This isn't the same as controlling application access. You still do that in Jira by the, for example, Jira users or service desk users group that you have in Jira that give you app access. So this is the Azure side essentially giving you the ability to authenticate and see the icon on the Azure dashboard. Right, so let's save that. Then let's go to Single Sign-On. We'll choose SAML as the protocol. Say save here, yes. And now you see we go and edit the basic SAML configuration because there's still some placeholders for the entity ID and reply URL. Let's say edit. Now we have to replace this placeholder. So let's paste the URL from here and let's do the same here. And then we can say save. Close this. No, we'll test later. And now let's have a look here. You see in user attributes and claims, that's what's being sent in the SAML response. So if you need to do any changes in terms of usernames and that stuff, that's where you could configure this. But since we left the default configuration on UserSync for this tutorial, we're fine with the default configuration here as well. The last thing we need to do on Azure is copy the metadata URL. Say copy to clipboard here. And the metadata URL will allow us to configure most of the aspects of our app just by importing the metadata URL. If you don't have direct internet access from your Jira instance, then you could also download the XML here and then put in the XML file into our app to speed up the configuration. But let's go back to Jira. Say next here. And you see it's asking for the metadata URL now. Let's paste that in and say import. So successfully imported it. Let's go to next. In this screen it's asking us if the user ID is the same in Jira as in Azure AD. I'm just going to uncheck that quickly. There you can see if that wouldn't be the thing, there's lots of options that you have to modify it, look up via the email address, for example, drop the domain name via regular expressions. So there's a lot of things that you can do. Just ask us in support if you don't fit the tutorial 100%. But since we synchronized users in via UserSync, they will have the same username as in Azure, so we can leave that checked. And let's go to next. Now it's asking us about provisioning features if we want to create and update users. In this case, we're going to select the UserSync connector. And let's choose the Azure AD one that we created before. You could have left it on none and it would still work. What it means if you say here update with UserSync connector and then choose the right connector, it means whenever a user logs in, we actually do a API call to Azure and update that particular user's settings. So instead of waiting for the scheduled sync to update and synchronize the users, this makes sure that whenever a user logs in, his data is the most freshest. So, and that's the most common setup. If you don't want that, you could leave it to none and then the users are only updated during the scheduled sync. So say save and next here. And then we're pretty much finished. So now we come to the part where we test our configuration. So we can say start here. And that creates what we call an authentication tracker. So I copy this special URL here. And I'm going to open that URL in a second in an incognito window. That will get us to Jira, redirect us to Azure, where we can log in and get us back, and hopefully the login worked successfully. But then also here, this authentication tracker is a great troubleshooting tool because it contains a lot of information and keeps it all together, like the SAML responses or the SAML requests, the SAML responses, data from the HTTP request, and also what we extracted from the SAML response, what happened here. So that's a great tool for troubleshooting if something goes wrong. So I'll show you that now. Let's open an incognito window. Paste in the URL we just copied. You see it gets us to Jira, redirects us to Azure AD. Let me log in. No, let's not say signed in. And now it'll redirect us back to Jira. And as you can see, Jira shows us the first start wizard because it's the first time I log in with that synchronized users, as you would expect. Great, that worked. Let's go back to our Jira admin section. Now you see in the tracker the status is success, and if I just scroll down, you see the user ID, the status logged in, and a lot of debug messages, login information. So there's a lot of content that this authentication tracker has. If this would have gone wrong, you could just say contact support in the button down there, and that would be allowing you to open a ticket with us and also give you the option to attach this tracker straight away as a JSON file, which means you would give us a lot of information to help you determine what the issue is that you're running into. Since we've been successful, we don't need to do that. Let's go to next now. And this is the last screen. So basically, anything we have done so far didn't interfere with any user logins. So you had to have this special URL to log in that you could test it, but users still got their normal login prompt. If you now want to redirect all users to Azure AD, then you choose Enable SSO Redirect and you can say Save and Close. If that's not what you want right now, because you want to do it in a maintenance window, for example, or announce to the user first, you can also leave it unchecked, say Save and Close, and then you can always go back into the redirection section of our plugin and enable this Enable SSO Redirect afterwards and save the config. So I'm going to enable it now, say Save and Close, and that essentially finishes this tutorial. I hope you found it useful, but also let me say one thing. This plugin has a lot of additional settings that you can customize it to your needs. So this tutorial can only show you one very common setup. So we would really appreciate if that doesn't fit 100% your situation, then reach out to us, schedule a screen share session with us or contact our support so that we can help you. Have a great day.